Picture this. It's the night of January 27th, 1986. A conference room in Utah. An engineer named Roger Boisjoli is spreading photographs across a long table. Scorched rubber, damaged data going back years. He is arguing for the lives of 7 people he has never met. And he is losing. By morning, Boisjoli's bosses will overrule him. The launch will be approved, and millions of people will remember exactly where they were when they saw what happens next. So stow your tray tables, fasten your seatbelts, and prepare for some extreme turbulence, because this is Final Boarding Call. Hello, and welcome to Final Boarding Call. I'm your disaster-obsessed host, Alice.
And I am Zach.
My man.
Something like that.
Cool. We have to address something right off the top. They know about the pineapple.
Oh, you didn't edit out all your pineapples?
You guys. In our last episode about the Durango crash, I forgot to edit out one of our pineapples. Pineapple is the code word that Zach and I use for editing. And a very savvy listener made a comment asking if pineapple was our code word for editing. And ding, 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 we have a winner. It has since been edited out, so don't even go looking for it. This episode is based on the official Rogers Commission report, NASA's archived materials, Diane Vaughan's book, The Challenger Launch Decision, Truth, Lies, and O-Rings by Alan MacDonald, and testimony from Roger Boisjoli, preserved by MIT and the American Society for Engineering Education. All sources can be found in the show notes. The Space Shuttle program was born out of a promise. After the Apollo era ended, NASA went to Congress with something ambitious. A spacecraft that could fly to space, land like an airplane, and go back up again. Routine, affordable, almost like an airline.
Well, bada bing.
NASA told Congress they'd fly as many as 24 missions a year. That's crazy.
That's a lot.
By January of 1986, the program had completed 24 flights total ever.
Well, overpromise, underdeliver, baby.
They were preparing for their 25th. The orbiter Challenger was sitting on Launch Pad 39B at Kennedy Space Center, waiting for a mission officially designated STS-51L. Damn, what a sexy name.
They know how to name them over there.
So, quick primer on what we're looking at, because the shape of this situation is going to matter. A space shuttle at launch has 3 main pieces. There's the orbiter. That's the part that looks like a white airplane.
And it's just mounted to a gigantic rocket.
It's where the crew sits. It's the part where in your brain, like, that's the most recognizable part of the spaceship, I think. The orbiter rides on the back of a giant orange fuel tank, which is filled with the propellant that feeds the orbiter's main engines. And strapped to the sides of that orange tank are 2 white, very tall rockets called solid rocket boosters. These boosters are basically enormous, powerful fireworks.
And I love a firework.
And strapped to the sides of that orange tank are 2 tall white rockets called solid rocket boosters. These boosters are basically enormous, powerful fireworks. And once you light them, they burn until the fuel runs out. No off switch. They're lit. You're going. Together, those three pieces, orbiter. Why have I started pronouncing things like that?
Because you're so used to trying to pronounce a different language. Orbiter.
Sound weird when I'm saying it. Orbiter. Is that the right word? It's like that moment where you say spoon a million times and then it no longer sounds right. Okay. Those three pieces, orbiter, fuel tank, and the two boosters make up what NASA calls the stack. At liftoff, that stack weighs 4.5 million pounds.
Jeebus.
The boosters and main engines together produce enough thrust to push it from standing still to over 3,000 miles an hour in 2 minutes.
Sounds like a ride I would love to get on.
Me too. STS-51L had a crew of 7 people. The commander was Dick Scobie, a former Air Force test pilot on his second shuttle flight. The pilot was Michael Smith, a Navy captain making his first space flight. 3 mission specialists, Judy Resnick, an electrical engineer on her second flight, Ellison Onizuka, a former Air Force flight test engineer, and Ronald McNair, a physicist.
The man Ron?
Ron's on there. A payload specialist, Gregory Jarvis, an engineer from Hughes Aircraft. And one more name on the crew manifest that made this particular launch different from any launch that had come before it. Krista McAuliffe was a high school social studies teacher from Concord, New Hampshire. She was 37 when Challenger launched. She taught a course she'd designed herself called The American Woman. She was married to her high school sweetheart, Steve, who was a lawyer, and they had 2 kids, Scott, who was 9, and Caroline, 6. And she was, by every account from people who knew her, the teacher you remember. One of her former students, a man named Rick St. Hilaire, told New Hampshire Public Radio years later that she used to stir that kind of independent interest. She was, he said, extremely enthusiastic. I love that because I've also been called enthusiastic.
Sometimes in not such a fun way.
Oh, you know what?
But everybody needs that one teacher that they remember forever.
So true. Makes a huge difference. And high school sucks.
I only actually remember I remember 2 teachers from all of high school.
That's all you need. When he was working on an independent project at the New Hampshire State House, she didn't just sign off on it. She supported it. And she pushed him. That's just who she was. A teacher who, when one of her students wanted to go further than the curriculum asked him to, said yes. In 1984, President Reagan announced the Teacher in Space Project. NASA was going to fly a civilian teacher into orbit who would broadcast 2 live lessons from space back to students on Earth.
That's actually an incredible concept.
It's very, very cute idea. 11,000 teachers applied. 11,000. Krista was the one they chose. In her application, she said that she wanted to give an ordinary person's view of space, the idea that there was a new way of living out there, and ordinary people should be the ones telling that story. She took a leave of absence from Concord High School in September of 1985 and moved to Houston to train at the Johnson Space Center alongside the Challenger crew. I mean, this is not something where you just wake up the day of and you're like, sick, going to space.
Yeah, you're not showing up with a boarding pass and calling it good.
No. The training required is unbelievable. Her backup was a fellow teacher, Barbara Morgan, and the two of them went through training together for the next 4 months. NASA had approved 2 lessons for her to teach from orbit. The first was called the Ultimate Field Trip. It was a tour of the shuttle where she'd explain the vehicle and what life was like in microgravity.
Okay.
The second was where we've been, where we're going, why. A lesson about the history and purpose of space exploration. On top of those, she was going to film classroom demonstrations, Newton's laws of motion, how liquids behave in microgravity, fizzing chemical reactions, and color separation. And that would be packaged and distributed to schools. I just love this whole idea. Because of Krista, this launch was being treated as a national event. NASA arranged for schools across the country to watch live. In classrooms, in every state, teachers wheeled televisions in the front of the room. God, do you remember that? I mean, this is the 80s, so
It
it's
was
even...
the best day ever.
Yes. The TVs were so deep and the screens were so little.
Yeah, but I'm not sure that they bought any new TVs from the 80s to when we were in school.
Yeah. At her own school, Concord High, her students gathered in the auditorium wearing party hats, holding balloons and signs ready to cheer their teacher into orbit. The launch had already been delayed multiple times. Originally scheduled for July of 1985, it had slipped through the fall and into the new year. By late January of 1986, it was rescheduled again to January 28th.
To my birthday?
That's kind of cool. That's your birthday. That night, something unusual happened in Florida. The temperature dropped hard. The forecast called for overnight lows of only 18 degrees Fahrenheit.
That's real cold for Florida.
For Central Florida, that is extraordinarily cold. For the Space Shuttle program, it would make this, by far, the coldest launch attempt ever. The previous coldest launch had been at 53 degrees. And somewhere in Utah, a group of engineers at a company called Morton Thiokol saw that forecast, and they started making some phone calls.
Like, guys, this matters. Pay attention.
The company that built the solid rocket boosters, which are those 2 tall white rockets that are strapped to the side of the orange fuel tank, was Morton Thiokol. They built the boosters in Utah, shipped them to Florida in 4 big sections, and then assembled them at the Kennedy Space Center. Because it's really hard to, ship a booster. You know what I mean? It's just like,
But picture just driving by the highway when they've got some of those oversized load semis going. You're just like, what is that?
I always love it. The craziest one that at least I've ever seen, I won't speak for Zach, but it was a wind turbine all broken down, and the size of all of the components of those wind turbines, completely insane.
They're huge.
They're huge. It was humbling.
If you ever have a chance, go stand inside the base of one and just look up and watch the whole thing shake back and forth.
Have you done that? Man, what a cool life. Okay, so anyways, back to our boosters. So the places where those sections were joined together, the 4 big sections, were called field joints. And each field joint was sealed with 2 rubber rings called O-rings. But these are like the biggest O-rings known to mankind, because we use O-rings on our cars. That's a common term. But trying to picture the scale of these O-rings is wild. So an O-ring, like I said, it's something that you use on many, many things. It's a rubber gasket. I mean, it is literally a rubber O You have them in your house right now. There's one in your blender, one in the connector at the end of your garden hose, one sealing the door of your pressure cooker. Their job is to fill a tiny gap between two pieces of metal and keep whatever is inside. That's it. It's basically an anti-leaking rubber circle.
That's what gaskets are for.
But the O-rings on the space shuttle's boosters had a much harder job than your old blender. They were trying to contain gases that burned at 5,700 degrees Fahrenheit. Hot enough to melt steel, under pressure of nearly 1,000 pounds per square inch.
That's a lot.
And the engineers at Morton Thiokol had been worried about them for years. The engineer who was most worried was a man named Roger Boisjoli. Boisjoli had spent his career working on sealing problems. Not sealing like the ceiling of your house, sealing like you're sealing liquids inside of something. He was one of the people that Thiokol relied on to understand exactly how these joints were supposed to work. And in the early 1980s, he started to see things that scared him. After a cold weather shuttle launch in January of 1985, the one that was at 53 degrees, Boisjoli went out to the recovered boosters after they'd splashed down in the ocean. And when he pulled the joints apart, he found something that made him sick. Black soot past the first O-ring on two of the joints. Translation: hot gas had gotten through the first seal. The second seal had held, but only just. And engineers had a name for this. They called it blow-by. So imagine a leaky garden hose. Some water seeps past the first washer in the connector, but the second washer catches it before it gets to you. Now, imagine instead of water, it's a jet of hot gas, hot enough to cut through steel. Every time that Thiokol saw evidence of blow-by, it was a warning. The seal system was not doing what it was supposed to do.
At least not well enough.
Correct. On July 31st, 1985, Boisjoli sat down and wrote a memo to his boss, who's Robert Lund, the vice president of engineering. The subject line was SRM O-ring erosion potential failure criticality. That last word, criticality, is just NASA speak for how bad is it if this fails? The very worst rating, called criticality 1, was reserved for parts whose failure would kill the crew. The O-rings were criticality 1.
Yeah, when you start getting that little leak, then suddenly it turns into an explosion and nothing makes it up any further.
The first line of Boisjoli's memo said he was writing to ensure that management is fully aware of the seriousness of the current O-ring erosion problem. In the rest of this memo, he laid out the case. He told management in writing that if this was not fixed, they were looking at loss of a vehicle and, more importantly, a loss of crew. July 31st, 1985. That memo was written 6 months before the Challenger launched. It went up the chain and then into a drawer.
As it happens.
On the afternoon of January 27th, 1986, Boisjoli and his colleagues saw the forecast for the launch the next morning. 18 degrees overnight? They understood immediately that they were looking at a temperature far colder than the O-rings had ever been tested at. And here's why that mattered. Rubber gets stiff when it gets cold.
That'd do.
So we're going to do a little imaginary exercise. If you have ever put something in your freezer that had a rubber band wrapped around it, then you take it out and you go to take the rubber band off,
It almost always snaps.
Sometimes it'll disintegrate. Like, rubber does not do well at all in cold temperatures.
And 18 degrees is much colder than a freezer.
Unbelievable. The whole job of the O-ring was to flex fast, to spring into a gap and seal it the instant the rocket ignited. If the rubber was too cold to flex, the seal would not close in time, and the hot gas would find a way through. That evening, Morton Thiokol called for an emergency teleconference with NASA. Engineers in Utah, managers at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center in Alabama, personnel at Kennedy Space Center in Florida, where Alan McDonald, who is Thiokol's senior representative on site, was listening on the line. Boyce Jolie and a fellow senior engineer, Arnold Thompson, presented their data. They had photographs of these scorched O-rings from previous flights.
It's a good thing they went to check those out.
They had charts showing that the worst damage had happened on the coldest flights. And they made an explicit recommendation to NASA. Do not launch if the temperature at the joints is below 53 degrees Fahrenheit. Because we know that at 53 degrees...
It held. It was just not good.
Correct. It held, but it wasn't pretty. So anything below that, we cannot guarantee. The projected temperature at liftoff the next morning was going to be in the 20s or very low 30s.
Mm-mm.
The NASA managers on the call were not happy. One of them, Lawrence Malloy, who ran the solid rocket booster project for NASA, pushed back hard.
These things are fine. They've been tested. We're good.
He'd already been dealing with delay after delay. The whole program was under enormous pressure. And Malloy said something that has been quoted in every account of this disaster for the last 40 years. My God, Thiokol, when do you want me to launch? Next April? After more back and forth, Thiokol asked for a pause, a private discussion. There are people off the line in the conference room. Here is where the story goes from a technical disagreement to a human one. And here's the scene almost nobody knows. In that conference room in Utah, the engineers, Boyce Jolie, Arnold Thompson, and another engineer named Brian Russell, were now sitting across the table from 4 senior managers. Jerry Mason, the senior vice president of the Utah operation. Joe Kilminster, vice president of the booster program. Cal Wiggins, the general manager. And Bob Lund, the same Bob Lund to whom Boyce Jolie had written his memo 6 months earlier, the vice president of engineering. For 30 minutes, inside that room, the engineers tried to hold the line. Boyce Jolie later testified that he grabbed the photographs of the damaged O-rings and laid them out on the table. He pointed at them. He made his case, and when he looked up, the managers were staring back at him with what he described as cold stares. And he said he knew in that moment that further argument was pointless.
Yeah.
And then Jerry Mason turned to Bob Lund, the vice president of engineering, the man who had been holding the line on behalf of his engineers, and said, on the record, words that have become the most quoted sentences in the history of engineering ethics. Bob, it's time for you to take off your engineering hat and put on your management hat. Lund changed his position. So in that moment, he gave up on his engineers who were trying to convince him, and he sided with everybody else. When Morton Thiokol came back on the line with NASA, they had reversed their recommendation. They were now approving the launch. Alan McDonald, who was the Thiokol representative at Kennedy Space Center, the one who was supposed to sign the launch recommendation document on behalf of his company, refused to sign it.
Mm.
That dude's a gangster.
I don't know how gangster that is, but that's okay.
Nerdy. I imagine him thick-ass glasses.
I've got thick glasses.
I know, I'm into it. His signature was supposed to be on that form. It wasn't. Joe Kilminster signed it instead. Boyce Joe Lee later testified that after the reversal, he and the other engineers left the room in what McDonald called silent bewilderment. Boyce Joe Lee said he felt badly defeated. The crew knew none of this.
That's fair. Anybody that's going to be on board there has basically just been shoved in a black hole because they wanted to launch. They wanted to keep their funding, whatever the reason was. Usually it's funding. They expect so many launches and they haven't come anywhere near the amount of launches they're supposed to do.
And I think it's trust, right? I've had race years where I've been so busy I haven't been able to work on my car, and I've really leaned on Zach to get it ready for me. And in those moments when I am about to take a corner super fast, I trust that Zach has set up my car to be able to do what it needs to do. They are trusting that their crew at NASA has done everything, that they are putting their safety first. It's unbelievable. Overnight, the ICE team at Kennedy Space Center went out to inspect the vehicle. They found sheets of ice hanging off the launch tower. Using an infrared thermometer, a tool that lets you measure surface temperature without touching anything, a technician took a reading on the lower part of the right solid rocket booster. 8 degrees Fahrenheit.
Eek. Even colder than they ever expected.
Yep. That reading never made it up the chain of command. The temperature of the boosters themselves wasn't on the official checklist of things to verify before the launch. So even though the O-rings were criticality 1, even though their failure would kill the crew, there was no formal rule about how cold was too cold. At 11:38 in the morning Eastern Time on January 28th, 1986, after a 1-hour delay to let some of the ice melt, Challenger was cleared to launch. The air temperature at liftoff was 36 degrees. 3 miles from launch pad 39B, at the VIP viewing area, Krista's husband, Steve, is standing with their 2 children, 9-year-old Scott, 6-year-old Caroline. And a little ways off, Krista's parents, Ed and Grace, and her sister are at their own viewing site, also near the pad. 1,300 miles to the north, in Concord, New Hampshire, her students have packed into the Concord High School auditorium. They are ready to celebrate. And across America, in classrooms from California to Maine, children are watching live. This is the launch that they have been waiting for. This is the teacher's launch. Challenger rises from the pad, smooth, clean, white against a pale blue winter sky. In the first few seconds, the vehicle rolls and pitches over, heading out over the Atlantic. Everything looks normal. It's not. At 0.6 of a second after liftoff, 0.6 of a second, before the shuttle has even cleared the tower, a camera captures the first puff of black smoke from the side of the right solid rocket booster, near the bottom, at one of the field joints, exactly the place that Boyce Joe Lee had been worried about for years. Inside that joint, the cold had done exactly what he said it would do. The O-rings are too stiff. They haven't sealed. Hot gases are now leaking through. The black smoke is the rubber itself, charring.
Mm.
More puffs appear. 8 of them in the first 2.5 seconds. Then they stop. And here is one of the strangest parts of this story. For a while, the vehicle is saved by debris. The rocket fuel inside the boosters as it burns produces a residue. So you can kind of think of it like
Thick
ash.
black soot.
Exactly, soot or ash from a wood fire, but it's harder and it's stickier. And that, as that residue blew past the failed seal, some of it actually caught in the gap and hardened. It's basically
Making a new seal.
Yes, it's basically plugging a hole, all by accident. Well, the leak isn't fixed. It's just hidden. And that's what Challenger is now. For the next 50 seconds, the pineapple, the shuttle is flying on a plug of accidental ash, holding back gases that are insanely hot. However, on the ground, nobody knows any of this. The launch looks textbook. In the cabin, the crew is busy doing their job. They're running through their ascent checklist. Krista is on the mid-deck, the lower level of the cabin below the cockpit. She has no window. She is, at this moment, the most she's along for the ride. She's also the most famous teacher in America. In Concord High Auditorium, the students are on their feet cheering for her. Around 58 seconds into the flight, Challenger passes through a patch of rough air. Wind shear, it's the kind of sudden crosswind that pushes your car sideways on the highway. The shuttle's autopilot adjusts to hold the flight path, but the shifting forces flex. And somewhere down in that field joint of the right booster, the accidental plug of ash
broke free.
A jet of flame appears on the side of the booster, about 8,000 degrees, aimed directly at the giant orange fuel tank. What is in that fuel tank is 500,000 gallons of liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. The flame chews through the lower brace that holds the bottom of the booster against the tank. Then it starts cutting into the tank itself. Pressure sensors inside the tank begin to drop. In the cockpit, the crew has no warning. At 68 seconds, Mission Control in Houston radios up the routine call that happens on every shuttle flight. The green light to push the engines back to full power after a brief ease off during the most stressful part of the climb. Go at throttle up. Scobie acknowledges. His voice is steady. And those are the last words ever transmitted from the Challenger itself. At 72 seconds, the brace on the right booster finally gives way. The booster still firing at full power because it's a firecracker, so there's no turning it down. It's just you go. It swings outward, pivoting on the one attachment point that it still has up top, and it slams into the side of the fuel tank. Inside the cabin, the crew feels a lurch. Captain Smith says one word. It is picked up on the cockpit voice recorder. Uh-oh. At 73 seconds, the fuel tank ruptures. To the millions watching on television, it looks like an explosion. A white and orange bloom against the sky. 2 corkscrewing trails of smoke as the solid rocket boosters, still burning, fly off in separate directions. It wasn't technically an explosion, not the way that a bomb explodes. The orbiter, which is the airplane-shaped part with the crew inside, wasn't blown apart. It was ripped apart by the air resistance as the rest of the stack came undone around it.
Interesting.
The fireball is the fuel from the tank mixing with oxygen and burning in the open air. At NASA's public affairs desk, announcer Steve Nesbitt is still reading from a script. He continues for several seconds describing the ascent before he realizes what the screen is showing him. There is a long pause, and then finally, the line that would play on every news broadcast that night. Obviously, a major malfunction. At Concord High School, the auditorium goes silent. 3 miles from the pad, this is just so insane. 3 miles from the pad, the Corgans are looking up at a sky full of smoke trails. They had watched the launch with the naked eye, the vehicle climbing, the bright flash, the 2 white streaks splitting away from each other. And in the seconds after, they, like everyone else in the viewing area, were still trying to understand what they had just seen. The boosters, burning out of control, continue to fly on their own. They can't be shut off. They're finally destroyed at 110 seconds when the range safety officer, who is the person responsible for blowing up any rockets that go off course that might endanger people, sends the self-destruct signal. This is not the worst part of the story. The worst part comes later in a finding that would not be made public for months. When investigators recover the crew cabin from the ocean floor, they found something that none of them wanted to find. The cabin, the part of the orbiter where the crew sat, was a reinforced aluminum shell built to hold pressure. When the rest of the orbiter came apart, the cabin separated cleanly. It didn't disintegrate. It was thrown clear of the fireball. The forces at the moment of breakup were severe, but NASA's later analysis, conducted by a doctor named Joseph Kerwin, concluded that those forces were most likely not enough to cause death or serious injury.
So they sunk to the bottom of the ocean alive?
The cabin then began a long, arcing fall. Up first, coasting to about 65,000 feet, then down toward the Atlantic. When investigators recovered the cabin, they examined the crew's emergency oxygen packs, small breathing units mounted to the back of each seat, designed to be used in the event of a sudden loss of cabin pressure, not unlike
A plane.
The packs were called personal egress air packs, and each one had a manual switch that had to be flipped on. Crucially, the switch was on the back of the seat, meaning that the person sitting in that seat couldn't reach their own pack.
That sounds stupid.
The person sitting next to you had to do it for you. 4 packs were recovered from the wreckage. 3 of them had been switched on. The one that had not been switched on was the commander's, Dick Scobie's. One of the activated packs belonged to Michael Smith. Smith couldn't have reached his own pack, which means somebody else in the cabin reached over and turned it on for him. Investigators also found that switches on the cockpit panel had been moved after the breakup.
So they did, in fact, survive the breakup.
Switches that had been in their correct launch positions when Challenger left the pad were found in different positions when the cabin was recovered. They had been moved deliberately by someone still trying to respond. Dr. Kerwin's official report on the crew was sent to NASA in July of 1986. His conclusion, in his own careful language, was that the cause of death could not be positively determined. The impact with the ocean was so violent that it masked any damage from the seconds after the breakup. And he wrote that loss of consciousness from cabin depressurization was possible, but it wasn't certain. Translated out of that careful medical language, some of the crew members were alive, conscious, and helping each other for at least part of the fall. Here's the other thing the public didn't fully understand at the time. The space shuttle had no escape system. Every other crewed American spacecraft before the shuttle and since has had one, an emergency rocket on top of the capsule that can pull the crew clear of a failing booster. It's a kind of ejection seat, basically, for everybody.
Wild, but I like it.
NASA had decided back when the shuttle was being designed that escape systems were heavy, complex, and unnecessary.
Somebody got fired for that one.
Because in NASA's logic, this shuttle would be reliable enough that you'd never need one. There was nothing the crew could do. There was nothing that could be done for them. The fall from breakup to ocean impact lasted 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The cabin hit the Atlantic at roughly 200 miles per hour.
It's actually less than I would have expected, but I mean, that impact you are going, it's like smacking concrete. It doesn't matter that it's water. It's going to hit hard.
It's insane. Within hours of the accident, search and recovery operations began in the Atlantic. Why it took hours is baffling to me. Whatever they gotta do, I guess. The effort spanned hundreds of square miles of ocean, and it lasted months. President Reagan was scheduled to deliver the State of the Union address that evening, and he postponed it and addressed the nation instead from the Oval Office in a speech his speechwriter, Peggy Noonan, wrote in about an hour. In the middle of that speech, Reagan spoke directly to the children who had been watching live from their classrooms. He acknowledged that what they had just seen was hard to understand. He told them that sometimes painful things like this happen and that it was part of the process of exploration. Within days, he established a commission to investigate, chaired by former Secretary of State William Rogers. Its members included astronauts Neil Armstrong and Sally Ride, and a Nobel Prize-winning physicist named Richard Feynman. Feynman was in every sense the wrong kind of person to put on a polite government commission. He was 67 years old, dying of cancer, and had no more fucks left to give. That's not exactly what I wrote in my script, but that's truly...
It's my favorite kind of person.
He asked blunt questions, and he demanded blunt answers, and he did not care if people in the room were uncomfortable. So in my opinion, he is exactly the kind of person that I would want on this.
Yeah, ain't nobody got time for all the BS. Let's just get to it.
Yep. One of the other commissioners, reportedly the chairman, William Rogers himself, said of Feynman, quote, "Feynman is becoming a real pain. While the rest of the commission was running formal hearings, Feynman was doing something different. He was getting on planes, going to Kennedy Space Center, to Johnson Space Center, to the Marshall facility in Alabama. He wasn't talking to NASA's senior managers. He was talking to the engineers, the people who actually built the vehicle, and he was asking them a single question. What do you think the real chance is that this thing is going to blow up?" And what he heard was so different from what NASA was telling the public that he had to write it down to make sure he wasn't crazy. NASA's senior management was telling Congress and the press that the chance of losing a shuttle on any given launch was about 1 in 100,000.
Wow.
That's the number they were using. 1 in 100,000. The working engineers that Feynman talked to, the people building the rockets and testing the parts,
1 in 50.
They thought the real risk was closer to 1 in 100. Take a second with that, folks. 1 in 100,000 and 1 in 100.
Yeah, 1,000th of a percent to a percent.
I mean, they're 1,000 times apart. Feynman's conclusion was that NASA had two realities: an engineering reality, where the shuttle was a dangerous experimental vehicle flown by people who knew it was dangerous, and a management reality, where the shuttle was safe, routine operation being sold to Congress and the public. And the two realities had completely stopped talking to each other. That was the real finding, not the O-rings. The O-rings were the symptom. But the O-rings were what had killed the crew.
Yeah.
And Feynman had figured that out too, because he's a bad mamma jamma. During a televised hearing of the commission with cameras rolling, he did something that turned the whole investigation and the whole public understanding of the incident on its head. He took a small clamp, a sample of O-ring rubber, and a glass of ice water. He squeezed the rubber in the clamp. He dropped it into the ice water, and after a few seconds he pulled it out, released the clamp, and he held it up to the camera. The rubber did not spring back. We love a little Bill Nye moment. At room temperature, the same piece of rubber would have bounced back to its original shape almost instantly. That was the entire point of an O-ring.
Yeah.
It had to flex fast. And cold, it stayed. Crushed, stiff, it was slow. The entire technical argument, the argument that Boys Jolie and Thompson had tried to make the night before the launch in a conference room in Utah while their own bosses stared at them, had just been demonstrated on national television with props that you could buy at a drugstore. Feynman's personal observations were eventually published as Appendix F on the Rogers Commission report. He had to threaten to take his name off the entire report to force the commission to publish them.
Oh.
They are short. They are direct. And they end with a sentence that has become one of the most quoted lines in the history of engineering ethics. For a successful technology, reality must take precedence over public relations, for nature cannot be fooled.
Ooh.
God, I love that. The full Rogers Commission report came out on June 6th of 1986. It was honest.
That's what it has to be.
It said the decision to launch was flawed. The managers who made that decision didn't fully understand the history of problems with the joints. The engineers' concerns had not been communicated up the chain, and the pressure to keep the launch scheduled had created an environment where danger had been treated as routine. That last idea, that danger had been treated as routine, was later turned into an entire field of study by a sociologist named Diane Vaughan, and she called it the normalization of deviance. The idea is simple. Organizations don't suddenly decide to take risks, huge risks. They take small risks. And then the small risks don't cause disasters. So the next time, the organization takes a little bit of a bigger risk and a slightly bigger one until one day they are taking a risk that would have been unthinkable decades before. And it feels completely normal. Challenger had been flying with damaged O-rings for years. Each flight that came back with scorched rubber and didn't explode became, in the minds of the people making the decisions,
It worked.
evidence.
Yeah.
Yes. It was not evidence that they had been lucky in their minds, which it should have been.
And it was like, this thing wears, but maybe it's just a wear item.
The commission's recommendations were very specific. Redesign the booster joints completely. Reassess every component on the shuttle whose failure would kill the crew. Set up an independent safety office inside of NASA, which I love that idea. And, though it could never prevent every kind of accident, develop a way for the crew to escape if they need to. The space shuttle fleet was grounded for 32 months. When the program returned to flight in September of 1988, the booster joints had been redesigned with a third O-ring and small heating elements built into the seal area to keep the rubber warm, regardless of outside temperatures.
Smart.
So smart. Astronauts on launch and landing would, from then on, wear full pressure orange suits, the kind that you have seen in pictures, that look like fighter pilot gear. The Teacher in Space project was canceled. Barbara Morgan, who was Krista's backup, eventually flew to space in 2007, 21 years later, as a fully trained NASA mission specialist.
Okay. Good
How
for her.
insane is that? She could have been on that flight.
Yeah.
And instead of looking at that and being like, well, fuck no, space. You stay there and I stay here. She flipped a switch and became a fully trained NASA mission specialist. Barbara, unreal.
It's so weird to me that we have this fascination with wanting to explore what is not on our planet when we haven't even explored everything that is on our planet.
You're talking about deep sea, deep
I
ocean?
am. There's some scary, cool, huge things out there that we have no idea what they are. And we're concerned with leaving the planet before we even figure out what this planet is.
Send me in there, coach. I would love to do deep sea exploration. Note, not in the Ocean Gate Titan. And if you have not listened to that episode, you got to, because it's a wild one.
Yeah.
The families of the 7 crew members founded the Challenger Center for Space Science Education, which runs learning centers for students all over the world. And in 2018, more than 30 years after the launch, astronauts on the International Space Station filmed the classroom demonstrations that Krista had planned to teach: Newton's laws, liquids and microgravity, fizzing reactions, color separation. Her lessons finally taught.
Lived on.
And then there is Roger Boisjoli, who was our whistleblower from the intro. Truly a hero of this episode, if anybody had actually fucking listened to him. After he testified to the Rogers Commission under oath and described what had happened in that conference room in Utah, Morton Thiokol did not take it well. He was removed from his role as the company's liaison to the NASA investigation. He was shunned by his colleagues, and he ended up suing the company for retaliation and wrongful dismissal. In a 1989 talk at MIT, he described what had happened in his own words. He said the company came down on him, in his phrase, very, very hard, trying to discredit me in every possible manner that you can imagine. He ended up leaving the aerospace industry, and he never worked on another spacecraft. But he spent the rest of his life, the next 26 years, going to engineering schools and ethics conferences, which I love, in professional societies, and he told his story over and over again. Not the technical part, the human part of it, the story of a conference room of 4 managers, a stack of photographs, and a line about hats. He told engineering students, your job is not just to be right. Your job is to say it out loud and to keep saying it, even when people above you are staring at you with cold stares, especially then.
Most of the time, those cold stares come when it's going to make a huge difference.
Oh, my God. Roger Boisjoli died on January 6th of 2012. Every engineering ethics course in this country teaches his memo. 17 years later, after Challenger, in February of 2003, the orbiter Columbia broke apart during re-entry, killing all 7 of its crew. The investigation into that accident found that NASA had once again known about a safety problem. And in that case, it was foam debris from the fuel tank striking the orbiter at launch. and they had once again accepted it as routine rather than fixing it. The phrase normalization of deviance appears throughout the Columbia investigation report. Diane Vaughan, who had coined the term, based on the Space Shuttle Challenger, was actually called to testify in the Columbia trial.
All because it was her theory?
Yes.
Nice.
Whether any of us have truly learned the lesson that Richard Feynman wrote into the back of the Rogers Commission report is, nearly 40 years later, still an open question. And Zach, that is our story for today.
I guess we're coming back for some of the heavy ones. Man, I hate that the teacher's kids and husband were there watching.
Unbelievable. Horrible. Like, genuinely.
I assume that they are still alive at this point, though. Where are they at these days?
I don't know. I always try to give a little grain of privacy to...
It's just a curiosity that comes to me. Like, how does one bounce back from that?
I don't.
And then there's also the part of me that's like, did they have any kind of case? Did they also sue?
So, Zach, you actually asked a really interesting question, and her family, Krista's family, did sue. And
she was a civilian.
They reached a confidential out-of-court settlement with NASA and the booster manufacturer, which, rather than pursuing a public lawsuit, several families received over $750,000 each in 1986 money, which prevented future legal action against NASA. So it would have been over $7.7 million. So these ones always are kind of poopy to end, but if you would like to, we would love to hear from you in the comments. Shoot us an email, finalboardingcallpodcast@gmail.com. And, we have merch. We got some merch on our website if you're interested in supporting the podcast. Join us next time when we will be exploring another transportation disaster story. Until then, remember to stow your tray tables, fasten your seatbelts, and prepare for the unexpected, because not every trip reaches its final destination. Goodbye.
Bye.
Weirdo.